And this is Conant Show, and I always like to acknowledge and honor Paula Gloria for teching for me tonight and helping make this show seamless and nice and good and all that good stuff. And we have a return guest. Bob Lavaggi is here with us tonight, and I had an assignment. He gave me a book to read, and he's penned, and its title is Primal Economics, and I kind of just devoured it in the past 2 days, and it's a reasonably short read, but packed. It was a little bit of work. A lot of economics is an elusive subject, I guess you could say, and I have an interest in it, and so I would like to introduce Bob Lavaggi to you all, and my friend and movie customer.
Hi, lovely being here tonight. Thank you,
Thanks.
George, for inviting me to this event.
I guess in reading your book, I see that you make mention that this is a subject that you've been interested in for quite some time, but this is like a kind of a first foray into writing about it. Am I getting that right, or is you've been sort of researching the machinations of I'm going to say the U.S. economy or banking system for some time, yeah?
That's true. I started focusing on this subject after the collapse. In fact,
is that
perhaps,
2008?
Yeah.
Okay, so that sort of
when that happened, I thought I should really get a firm grasp on what's going on here. It seemed to me that the banks were running the show, but I couldn't exactly explain how to myself. It seemed like the government was subservient to the banking community, and I started thinking about that. And but I wanted to correlate that with my sense of economics in a narrow sense, where we get up each morning and we go to work and we put in our day's effort, and at the end of the day we earn a certain amount of money so we can go and buy food and clothing and shelter.
yeah.
And I wanted to bridge the gap a little bit between this personal economics that I've lived with my whole life and the big economics that seem to have to do with finance and banking.
Yeah, I was intrigued with the title Primal Economics, and I enjoyed the premise that you put forth, because it's something that I often talk about, which is the idea of a natural economy or indigenous economy, and you go right to the animals themselves, whether it's a vegetarian like a squirrel gathering nuts and banking his nuts, and the wolf perhaps banking on eating a squirrel, to survive, and or bigger game, perhaps the coyotes take out a deer, and then the vultures circle in and make use of whatever's left over, and so there's these different classes in the animal kingdom, or in the natural construction, the cosmic construction. And there's another element to this, Bob, that I want to throw out at you, and that is the idea of of a cosmic contract. Now this is going to seem really left field for you right away, but I got to tell you where this comes from. Now, I have a lovely, lovely elderly friend. She's a brilliant investment banker, I guess. She worked on Wall Street, and she is tough as nails, being a woman in Wall Street and working up through the ranks into the executive levels. And she's black. And in this white male-dominated scenario down in Manhattan. So,
Okay.
so in her retirement, I got to know her up here because I was the carpenter for the house she was renting, and we got to talking. And it turns out that, you know, she's deeply spiritual. And in our discourse about economy and money and stuff and human endeavor, she came up with this term that she and I, in our efforts, because she was very, very, very pessimistic about our world future, about even our national future or our local future. And I came in with a message of pure positivity that just blew her away. And then she said that we came in together in this world at this time with this cosmic contract to do something. And I got the biggest kick out of that because, you know, this is this kind of a banker language being applied to one, say, you know, as in my Native American training would be, you know, your vision, you know, and your mission in life,
Yeah.
right? Now, this can also be referred to, Primal Economics as the idea of the dog-eat-dog scenario out there where it's like, you know, every creature for itself, or with creatures, they actually are really quite organized if the more you study it, whether it's a beehive or the wolf pack or the lion's pride, you know, they actually work together, they think things through. So that's almost like really, I'm not really hitting it right there, this dog-eat-dog scenario. That's something else.
Well, I mean, that's good that you mentioned dog-eat-dog. Usually when the expression dog-eat-dog is used, it's a pejorative about unfairness within the context of society where there is some effort to be fair. But I think that economics, in and of itself, separate from ethics, separate from morality, that is the nature of economics, that each organism is out to nourish itself. And I was raised with an ethical perspective and looked down on this whole dog-eat-dog scenario. But over the last 10 years, I tried to separate economics from ethics and try to understand economics in and of itself, just the way a volcano is brutal to humanity, and hurricanes, typhoons, earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
All these things are natural phenomena which are damaging to the human race, but they are facts of life. And I try to look at economics as a bitter fact of life that either we come to terms with and clean up after the mess, or we just get rolled over by it.
Many years ago, it was probably maybe 35 years ago or more, I lived down in Rockland County, and there's the Gannett newspapers down there. The Rockland County paper was the Journal News, I guess, okay? And I would contribute, letters to the editor from time to time. And I was ruminating about, the responsibility of our economy to the health and quality of our ecology, okay, of our planet.
Right.
And I had started learning from a very brilliant teacher, Twyla Nitsch, and she would parse words. She would take words apart. And she explained to me that if you really want to know what a word means, you go down to the syllables. So say in economy, all right, there's 4 syllables. Well, each syllable has a meaning when you separate and apart from the word. So you write that down. You look it up. You go to the dictionary. If it's a good dictionary that has syllabic, root meanings, then you write that down, almost like a free-form sentence, right? And then she goes, but if you really want to know what the word means, each letter has a meaning. So you go to the letter, A, alpha, whatever, and you go to the meaning of the letter. And then, when you're done with all of that, you take the meanings of the letters and the meanings of the syllables, and then you read it out. Just write it down in any order, because you can change the order of each of those words in that budding definition.
Right.
Okay? And it started to blow me away, because you could do it with any word. So, in my little thought exercise in this little letter to the editor, I was saying, if we look at the word economic and the word ecologic, and you take them apart, what do they say? What do the words actually say? And the closest meaning I could get for E was earth in all of my dictionaries. It seems E seems to come back to earth.
Yeah.
All right? And then co has a Latin root, and that means with. And nom is name. And ic is pertaining to. Earth with name pertaining to. Earth in name pertaining to earth. And then I said, well, nom, name, something pertaining to the name, and something name with the earth. And so I looked up name to name something. Do you know that's a lot of meaning in name? Do you know what name means? Besides identifying us as, my name or your name, it means to claim. It means to actually claim something. When you name something, you have claimed it. So, earth with claim, pertaining to the claim of the earth, is economic. Now, the textbook definition of economy is the collective activity of a large group of people in their daily pursuit of making a living.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's sort of like the pat definition of economy, all right? But if you take the word apart, it means claiming the earth. And if you think about what our economic activity does and what that root definition says, it's pretty spot on.
Well, you certainly have put a whole new spin on,
I wanted to,
on,
but
on
let's
this subject than in my book. But I would say that everything that you're saying correlates with the book. Basically, you just wrote another chapter for my book.
Well, I'm not done with you because you bring up a lot of stuff in here that I'm not going to say I'm an expert on, but I'm interested in have armchair studied. But then let's go back to ecologic.
Okay, before we go, I do have the definition of economic that I used in the book.
Yeah, you do.
Would it be all right to just put that out on the table now?
You want to read from it, or
Well, I don't have my glasses.
I don't have. Yeah, you do. They're right there.
Wrong glasses, but let's see how I do.
Oh, okay. I don't have my glasses either, folks. I left them at the job site.
Hey, George, I thought the definition of economics should be the study of human happiness. If resources make people happy, shouldn't that be the study of human happiness?
I
It
would
sort of
say-
is.
I would say that is kind of a tangent to what I'm saying. It's certainly a factor.
Did you find your quote?
No, I need to find my glasses.
Oh,
before I find my quote. I'm
Maybe
gonna-
I can read it
or
at
maybe
arm's
you can
length.
Use my glasses.
That's only why I shot my thought in there.
These glasses are filthy, my friend.
Did you ever read Henry George?
No.
Do you know he wrote a book called Progress and Poverty? He said with the turn of the century, around the 1900s, he was studying how come when civilization advances you see such abysmal poverty, whereas in primitive areas you don't see such poverty.
Well, that I really.
I have
Talked about a
invented
lot.
the term primal economics. Where do you want me to start?
No, the use of I use the word economics.
Is it right at the beginning, or?
Right, maybe in the beginning of the first chapter, chapter 1.
All right, so we have, I assert that looking at a default function, in this case economics.
Yeah, that's not what I'm looking for. Let me see if I can find my other glasses.
All right.
Do you want me to look through it?
All right, so just reading from the introduction for a moment while Bob, oh, there you go. Okay, he's got his glasses.
Yeah, what we gonna
Very
do?
good.
Where you guys?
Anyway, monopoly. Monopoly was what Henry George was against. That's what he discovered from the ground up.
Yes.
He said that in primitive societies you don't have monopolies. And that's why we have all the anti-monopoly laws. And that's what's been ignored with the growth of Google. If Google could be what it is if it didn't acquire 64 companies to do it. If it did it with its own stuff,
Yeah.
it could do it.
Well, have you found your
Okay.
quote?
Yeah,
Okay.
I've had. Okay. The definition states of relating to or based on the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services.
Uh-huh.
That's my, when I say economics or economy,
Right.
production and consumption of goods and services.
Okay.
I just wanted to put that out here in relation to the rest of the conversation.
Sure.
But do you want to pursue?
Well, I'm just teasing out a thought in terms of, this idea of our collective behavior as a species, and what that impact is on our natural support system, because you reference frequently in this book the idea of scarcity, resources, and the primal economics of how those resources, the abundance and scarcity, is regulated by the creature beings' cosmic contract in their behavior systems, right? And how they interact, how the natural economy of the animals interact with their environment and each other, as opposed to what we have come along and done, and sort of you broach the idea that, well, mankind, in inventing money, has tried to equalize and bring ethics and morality into the natural construction, so that there's a sense of distribution of those resources in a more sense of just and fair kind of way than, say, a dog-eat-dog mentality. But the ideal of that and the reality are two different things. The reality is that, as I got towards the end of the book, that we're dealing with a control paradigm of a small group of people who are protecting their interest in ownership of this money supply that is manipulated in these almost grotesque ways. I was going to say creative, but they're really, this is astonishing how these banking systems work. Now, in 2008, there was the crash of 2008 in the United States. Spurred a movie that came out about 3 years ago called The Big Short. Did you see that?
Yes, I saw that.
Now, does that relate to?
Yes.
Okay, because that's where I'm going now. All right. So we've established that, in primitive societies or in the animal kingdom, that there is a very kind of direct economy. You do what you got to do to secure food for yourself and your progeny.
Right.
Where now we have supplanted that kind of rudimentary activity with civilization scale magnitude.
Yes. I think one point that I made in the book was that animals have no capacity to bank their holdings. The wolf's bank is the size of his stomach. When he eats as much as he can, that's it. He can't collect more until the next day when he's hungry again. Which is true with all the creatures of nature. Squirrels are able to collect nuts, but even then those nuts rot and decay, and he's got to start over next year. In the case of money, it doesn't decay. It's only an idea, so ideas are not subject to decay. They can exist for as long as people have the thought of money indoctrinated into them, then it can exist. And once you can accumulate money, especially now electronic money, you don't need to put it anywhere. You just write down that that's what you have. The bank agrees that that's what you have, and that's your money. So humans are able to accumulate endless, infinite amounts of wealth, which does not happen in primal culture, primal economics.
Yes, if you want to be a wealthy tribe, you have lots of goats, and if you're a poor tribe, you have to buy them.
Yeah, or steal them.
Or steal them.
However, even goats, the land can only sustain a certain amount of goats. But money is, being an idea, you can have thousands, millions, billions, and trillions. And And then the whole world of finance is designed around how a person can name that, to go back to your explanation, name that amount the money is his and get everyone to agree that that money is his. But that is
And that money is an idea.
an idea. That is a big distinction between the primal culture and civilization, except that if animals could accumulate more than they could hold in their belly, they would. They just didn't figure out how to do it. So at the root of banking is primal instinct to accumulate as much as you can without regard for any other factor.
And actually, this is impacted human evolution
Yes.
in sense that in a natural economy, the hunter-gatherer or agricultural based economy, the selection of a mate would be what is based on security, food security,
Okay.
food, shelter, warmth. The
It was an
security,
economic choice.
right? So that economic choice was, well, okay. Bill over there is real handy with his bow and arrow, and he's bringing home game on a regular basis. He looks to be a good mate for Veronica, so she goes with him, and so then that the genetics is expressed from that union and so on through the course of the generations.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, if you look at horses and the horses that escaped and were stolen and became Mustangs out on the western plains are not the same kind of horses that got away in the beginning of the colonial contact.
Mm-hmm.
And the conquistadors and all of this. Natural selection of the deserts out west have bred horses that are kind of funny looking. They're stockier. They're rugged. They can, subsist on less water and less, food. And by comparison to what we see as horses, they're not as pretty, all right. They're not as nice looking, to our eye, but the demands of the life environment, those horses have had to survive, and so those choices, mating choices, have produced the modern Mustang today. So we're kind of in a similar situation as human beings, where what we value. And this is kind of the beginning of your book. Is you were moved to write this book, if I'm paraphrasing this right, for the betterment of our culture, for the betterment of our people, for the betterment of our individuals.
I wrote the book hoping to give readers another perspective on economics, so that the principles of economics can be used rather than we so often feel victimized by the field of economics rather than seeing economics as a tool for advancing our well-being. And so that was at the bottom of why I wrote the book.
Yeah, because I have to be honest, I wasn't quite clear where you were kind of going with it. I mean, because some of it was a lot of information, when you're getting into like who owns the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve System as opposed to the bank, and the 12 banks that own the central bank, where the real shareholders are, and so on and so forth. And I was intrigued with the dialectic between Hamilton and Jefferson, and you know, and Hamilton's position that the common man, the average citizen, is incompetent in the realms of correct financial choices for their nation, and that, you know, that should be, you know, sort of those empowerments should be sort of regulated or reserved for
The intellectuals,
the
or the wealthy.
the wealthy. And it doesn't even necessarily mean intellectuals, but for the
The wealthy
well-bred
class.
and the
Yeah,
wealthy
yeah.
class, and so there was a protectionism of wealth, and that they had just, you know, they just skinned King George of his scam, and they didn't want the populace to be skinning them here after independence.
I mean, that, again, is pointing to the primal nature of economics. A primal nature lurks underneath all of the civility. Certainly, Hamilton presented himself as an extremely civil person, with class and prestige. But his thinking was, underneath all of that civility, was how to grab and hold on to wealth for himself and his close associates.
Right.
I point throughout the book that anywhere you see supposed civility, underneath it is still primal economics. And the whole notion of fairness is within the context of civility, but I think that fairness, I mean, I believe in fairness. Fairness is good, but I often think that fairness is just used as another mechanism for manipulating the economy in one direction or another. I think that economists all across the spectrum all have their own idea on how to manipulate the economy for themselves and their sector of the economy. But underneath it is the attempt to draw resources from one place towards another.
Well, I want to talk about money for a minute.
Okay.
And you know, money has been with mankind for a long time, a long time. There's nothing new about money. And one of the interesting things that I hit into in my research over the years was the Sumerians. You know, probably the oldest documented civilization.
Mm-hmm.
10,000 years,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps even older in some reckoning. And in their tablatures and in their record keeping on clay tablets that were either baked or fired,
Yeah.
gave us a permanent record of their economy, of their doings, of their divorces and marriages and funerals and trade agreements and debts. And they had many of the same scenarios of economic manipulation that we have today. And that was kind of mind-blowing to me. It's like, you know, we're all sort of sold this bill of goods that, you know, this is all new. We have all these new inventions, and, you know, we went from the counting on our fingers and toes to the abacus, and then from the abacus we've gone to, you know, written numbers and, you know, numerical systems, and then from there we've gone to adding machines, mechanical adding machines, which then became computers. So we're inventing new stuff, but really the behaviors are the same. And in my view, the thing that was a big eye opener for me was this idea that Ben Franklin had, which was if you had a tough decision, right? You had to make a decision. And you didn't know which way to go with it. Am I going to go this way or that way with it? So he would divide a page in half and write pros and cons. And so this is a good result of the decision. This is a potential bad result. This is a good result. This is a bad result. This is a good. And so and then whichever side of the ledger had the most thought, that's where he would swing his decision. So I tried it with money one day. And the question I had before me was, what are all the good things you can do with money? And what are all the rotten things you can do with money?
Okay.
Guess which list was longer?
I mean, I'm going to guess based on your attitude that the crummy things.
Yeah. I mean, just.
went out, but you kind of signaled that to me.
Yeah.
I would say. I'm sure you could think of. It depends on who's doing the judging, what crummy means, and what good means, and what the purposes are.
What's really got me, I mean, your book has brought up a lot for me, and one of the things it brought up for me is that those Sumerians had kings, they had rulers,
right?
They had an elite class that had the wealth.
Right.
And in supplanting barter and trade, not even supplanting, but interjecting into it, money as a medium of exchange, they created this opportunity to create wealth
Yeah, well,
in not so ethical ways by just simply accumulating the medium of exchange. And the more of that medium of exchange you've accumulated, whether by ethical or moral reasons or not, didn't matter, because you have now this pile of gold, and in our case paper, as an idea of wealth that you can buy mountains and move them if you so desire. So, yeah.
Well, that's a combination of the primal instinct to accumulate,
Right.
which I believe existed all through humanity.
Well, it's the
right to-
cosmic contract that we come in as a biological
Yeah.
entity.
And as the human race became more and more clever in abstract thinking, along the way they figured we can collect all these little things to keep track of our wealth, and then get everybody to want those little things, and then get them to do what we want them to do, so that we give them some of these nonsense little things that we're pretending have value. But it was very effective. People back then loved getting these little tokens of wealth that they could negotiate with. And it does make trade much more, it facilitates trade. So there's the ability to accumulate wealth and transfer wealth, and thereby transfer goods. So all of these things were led towards greater wealth for more people. If you didn't quite catch on to the tricks, you fell to the side and were servants, or more brutally slaves. And if you just accepted your position there as a servant or a slave, then that kind of established a hierarchy, a wealth hierarchy.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. In your penning this book and in your researching for it and your other, search, seeking of truth and such, what have you come away with, after having, published? What, like now when you think about your primal economics and the concepts that you've brought up and the research that you've done into this world, which is very enigmatic for a lot of us.
Yeah.
They use a lot of fancy language to keep us all confused.
That's right.
But if you could, what's your vision on this?
Vision, well, I guess my vision is that people will read the book and be inspired to be primal on one level, and then bring their own ethics to their activity. But I think that it's important to recognize that it's necessary to have primal, to exert this primal instinct to take care of yourself, just the way the natural creatures in the natural world do.
Is that almost to say that in our current social and economic construction that we live in as modern people, we don't do that anymore? We don't
Well,
exercise our primal cosmic contract to sustain ourselves?
I think everybody does to one degree or another. It's very hazardous to recommend that a person be primal about economics because it really presses on the ethical fabric, which is not good.
No.
It's not good at all. But
That's why tyrants love money. But anyway, go ahead.
right. I make a point towards the end of the book that if right now money is the foundation of economics, really underlying that is work. But at this point, money is the medium to get the food, clothing, and shelter that we need.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, there are trillions of dollars of wealth that are in the hands of very few people. And those people want to lend that money. They don't know what to do with it, so they want to lend it. And they've gotten all of us to borrow it just so that we have it, even though we have to pay it back. And it's really a racket. Now, the government of the people, by and for the people, has the capacity to tax, to get access to that wealth. And the wealthiest people have the rest of the country afraid of taxation. But if everybody in the country paid 1% of their net wealth in taxes, that would be $1 trillion, bang, right into the, right into internal revenue.
Mhm.
That is more than we're deficit spending. So if everybody paid 1%, it would eliminate deficit spending. If everyone paid 2% of their net wealth, you could cut back on income tax. And it would be a flat tax. Every single person would pay 1% of their net wealth. So if your net wealth was $100, you paid $1 a year in taxes. If your net wealth was at $10 million, $100 million, you paid $1 million in taxes.
Mhm.
But it's 1% for everyone. So after everyone pays their taxes, relatively everybody is still relatively as wealthy or poor. It hasn't changed the balance. Meanwhile, the government would not have to borrow money. And
Well, see, this is an interesting point because I don't think the government has to borrow money anyway. It does because of a manipulation.
well,
You know,
I agree with you that there's a manipulation. I think that the wealthy people, we are doing the wealthy people a favor by borrowing their money. They're not doing us a favor by lending it.
Correct.
Yeah, so we agree on that. I only see taxation as a way to get that wealth back into the economy. Do you see another way?
Well, when you were talking about how money supplies, get pulled out of circulation because of the corporate business activity of getting people to borrow, getting people to buy
Yeah,
their stuff,
that's right.
and then raking off their profits, and then what do they do with those profits? Now, in some instances it gets reinvested into their activity for reaping more profits, but does that reinvestment actually spill into the economy again? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe limited a way it does or doesn't.
It does.
But in order to combat that
Yeah.
scenario, we have fiat money that you talk about being created out of thin air, so that theoretically, when a bank lends some money to a customer, there should be real money somewhere to back up the loan. But 97% of the money is the bank makes. It makes the money out of thin air.
Yeah,
as
that's
you
true.
say in the book.
That's true. That's true.
And see, I've always wanted to start a bank to do that myself.
Well, just try to start a bank.
It's a bit of a club. You have to be in the club to be a bank.
It's totally a club.
Yeah.
It's totally a club. All these credit unions, they function as banks, but they're not allowed in the banking club.
Right.
They're not allowed to do what banks can do. They are limited. They can't create fiat money, but Bank of America and Chase, you go in there and you want to borrow money, if you meet their criteria, they lend it to you, but they're lending it out of thin air. to you.
Right.
Uh,
Now that's a similar dynamic as the idea that in 1929, the crash of 29,
yes.
was blamed largely on marginal investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget how that was termed, but investors could buy stock 10 cents on the dollar. So they weren't backing up their purchases.
Mm-hmm.
And in so doing, eventually those loans get called in and there's no money to pay it and there's guys jumping off of buildings.
Yes.
All right, so that's kind of like a shorthand view of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there was all this money was lost. Now, my dad had this conversation with me once upon a time, and he goes, no, you got that whole scenario wrong. He said, when there is vast amounts of money being lost,
Mm-hmm.
it's being lost by somebody.
Right.
Somebody else is making it.
Right.
And what he described to me is that there were winners and losers, and it was engineered. All the crashes are engineered, and so was the last one and the one that's coming, because what they're doing is they're pumping it up. They're pumping up a bubble and bursting it deliberately. That's my take on it.
Well, I agree with you.
Which is unethical.
Completely. Yes, it's unethical within the context of ethics, but if you're an economist who doesn't consider ethics, then it's just you just rely on the gullibility of the people who are.
Well, you see, that's just it. Now you brought this idea also in your out in your book, how banking is a business, and part of the banking business is making money, be it fiat money or other assets.
Yeah.
And I love that you also brought up this idea, which I encountered about 20 years ago, and that is the difference between a liability and an asset. And the assets aren't the money in the bank.
Right.
The actual money in the bank is a liability because they're holding on to it. The assets are all the loans out there, the debt
Right.
that they've put people in.
That's right. When people owe the bank money,
That's an asset
that's an asset for the bank.
for the bank.
And it's a liability for the people who owe the money.
Right, and so when people are putting money in the bank is holding on to their money, that's a liability.
Right.
And it took me a while to wrap my head around that concept.
Right.
But it's, to put it in simpler terms, if you were to say, hey, George, could you hold on to my bag of corn here while I go, shoot a deer? While I'm holding on to that bag of corn and you're expecting it back, I'm now responsible for it.
Right. It's your burden.
So now it becomes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So how do we
Well,
where do we go from here, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I think
that's why
that-
I was pushing for a vision from you.
Right.
If you were
Well,
to,
I mean, to go back to primal economics,
yeah,
the creatures in the natural world go to work and do the best they can. It's kind of obnoxious to say go to work when there is no work. But the reason that there's no work is because we've trained ourselves, we've been indoctrinated to think that someone has to give us work rather than create work, find work, and just do the work of looking for work. The squirrel gets up every morning and runs around. Some days he finds nuts and some days he doesn't. And hopefully humanity will cover them to some degree. Hopefully humanity will cover people who don't find nuts. But relying on that is, if you have to rely on it, rely on it. But the best thing to do is to just be industrious and look for work. Just because that's the volcano that we're living on. Either you have to produce for yourself one way or another, or you don't. And
So do you mind my asking, what did you produce for yourself as your profession, as your trade?
Beautiful artwork.
I was terrible in school. I didn't know what I was going to do for a living. But I discovered that I could bang nails and connect wood and material and make things. And I started out doing it.
So you created your own work?
I created work for myself. People needed things fixed, I fixed them. I did, in all the areas that I was weak in academically, I was able to put wood together for people. And I lived quite modestly most of my life. But I did build things that I owned. And all of a sudden, with inflation, I have a modest amount of money to retire on.
Well done. Well
I
done.
hate saying this because it sounds a little righteous, but
No, not at all.
it is the result of work.
So we got to wrap it up, and I'd like to, thank you for coming on the show. And I feel like we just scratched the surface here a little bit, but Bob Lavaggi.
You certainly threw me curveballs.
Well, you said you wanted something to challenge you. I have his book here to cover. I guess I'll go to this camera. I go to that camera. There we go. And there it is, Primal Economics, and it's published locally by Bear and Company or something.
Bear Publishing.
Bear Publishing, and it's a real interesting read. And I suggest y'all look into it. Is it carried by Mirabai or any of the local bookstores or?
It's carried by Bear Publishing.
Okay, so you got to go right to Bear.
It's and it's not even on the website. I haven't been promoting it.
Okay, well, we're promoting it tonight a little bit. If you're interested in Primal Economics by Robert Lavaggi, I don't know what to tell you.
Spell his name.
Lavaggi. And it was a really it was a good read.
Good, thank you.
And thank you for coming on the show, and thank you, Paula Gloria Barton, for teching, and thank you for watching Woodstock TV. Everybody have a nice week, and we'll see you next week.